Hi everyone, on to another heavy topic in this module of vulnerable populations. These are topics and groups of people that break my heart, and I hope that they will at the very least open your heart and mind to especially vulnerable people that experience great health risks mentally and physically, and that you can explore these topics and learn about these different people groups with an eye for how can I care better for these people and how can I learn more about their stories and address their specific needs that make them especially vulnerable in health. And so today we're talking about family violence. We're talking about more than that. We're talking about domestic violence. We're talking about abuse. We're talking about the effects of chronic trauma. And we're talking about a term that's known as adverse childhood experiences. So here we go. Again, a brief overview is my goal with you reading the lecture slides and clicking on the links for more details on your own. There's 3 different types of violence that we're talking about today listed here. Intimate partner violence is the more professional term used for domestic violence, and it is something that is purposeful, deliberate, and is all about maintaining control and power. Other terms for that are listed here. This is probably not new to you, the different types of intimate partner violence that are out there. Even stalking is considered in that. I have a couple questions scattered throughout here that I'd love for you to pause and reflect on before I keep talking in your video. But is this true? Do you think that violence in families does not coexist with love? And I would argue that this is false, that there can be love and there can be violence that coexist together, that this is not a black and white scenario. My hope is that your reading of the book, The Glass Castle, is helping you see that there are beautiful ways that Rex loves his children and creatively cares for them, and there are awful ways that he neglects them and exposes them to domestic violence. Now, we can argue about what the definition of love is, but the point is that people who are perpetrators of violence, who are involved in violent families, are not all bad, and that these are really difficult issues to look at and very complex. The next one, men who batter women are mentally ill. Is this true or false? The answer is false, and statistics show us that the rates of mental illness in men who batter versus men who do not batter is about the same. I won't read this for you here, but please take a look at these that are often characteristics of batterers. And we have learned through research that the greatest predictor of someone becoming a batterer is the last one on the list, being a victim of physical or psychological abuse. We're going to watch a video on this topic, and it shows how this is a cycle. Is this true or false? Women who accept battering have mental health issues. Research shows that this is not really true. Again, the rates of mental illness in victims of domestic violence versus non-victims is about the same. However, you can imagine that there are significant mental health stressors, not only that perhaps keep women in these conditions, but also are brought on through these conditions. Here are some of the common victim characteristics. Very interesting, the 2 at the bottom related to ethnicity and education. And remember to keep in mind that, again, the idea is that abuse is happening because of power and control. Do you think this is true? Is it better for the child to stay with abusive parents than to experience a disruption in living situation? So this is false. We do not want a child to stay in an abusive situation. However, the Child Welfare Service, what used to be considered CPS, Child Protective Services, now called Child Welfare Services, works really hard towards reunification because stability for a child is incredibly important for their overall development. And so unless it is imminent danger, yes, often the goal is to avoid disruption of the living situation. And again, this is complex, this is a gray area, and sometimes this can do more harm than good, and that's why each individual situation needs to be given great care and thought. Abused children become abused adults. Is this true or false? It is definitely false. This is not an automatic thing. However, there is a cycle. And if you are coming from an abusive situation and you have not had positive influences, any positive or loving role models, adult role models or caregivers in your life, then your chances are higher of eventually becoming involved in an abusive situation as an adult. Here are some myths and misconceptions that I want you to look over and just pay attention to. Are there any of these misconceptions that you have held on to unknowingly? Known risk factors, these should not be surprising: poverty, any kind of family stress, pregnancy, which induces stress in and of itself, and disability or impairment. All of these things add to the general stress that a person is under, and that can make them seek more control or power, or seek the safety, quote unquote, of their current living situation, even if there is abuse present. Safety meaning some sort of stability, whether it's economic stability, whether it's a sense of um, belonging. There's lots of factors like that as well. This is the cycle of violence. I want you to just kind of look this over. There's more resources linked at the end of this lecture if you'd like to learn more. But essentially, this is what happens in an abusive relationship. There is a period where stress and tension builds, emotions, anger build. There is some sort of an explosion, an outburst, an attack, or a threat. And then there's the honeymoon phase where there's a ton of apologizing, promising I'll never do this again, maybe gift giving. And throughout all of this cycle is denial with both parties that this will continue to occur, that it will ever happen again. What the research tells us is that the longer a relationship goes on with a cycle of violence, the cycles will become shorter in duration and happen more frequently. Why does she stay? Is that really what we should be asking? Or should we be asking, why does he or she batter, right? So this is not specific to one sex or gender. Why does he or she stay? Why does he or she batter is actually a more appropriate question that shifts the blame from the victim to the batterer. But it is important to understand a victim's motivation for staying in the situation, right? It's not the number one or the only question we ask, but it is something that we want to assess in a non-judgmental manner. And so these are some of the reasons that they stay. And if they have children, it is often for a sense of stability economically, or a fear of repercussion. Our relationship with the clients that we interact with is huge and goes such a long way in being a part of the solution. And so it's really important that we're asking questions, that we're using motivational interviewing to understand the patient's motivations, why they're in the situation, and then begin to explore steps for getting out. It's important that we educate, that we offer a safe space, and that we do not lecture and promote judgment about why they're doing what they're doing. Again, here there's more effective interventions for being involved in developing rapport, and definitely not debating the situation is important. I talked about motivational interviewing in an earlier lecture on health education. So this is just another graphic that gives more detail to the cycle of change that we are trying to engage clients with. We're trying to ask open-ended questions to find out where they are at in this process of change and help move them along the process so that they can eventually take action to make meaningful changes to get out of the situation that is causing harm for them. The next few slides talk a lot about the impacts of intimate partner violence on pregnancy, um, what kind of physical and emotional impacts can happen. And it's really important to note that prenatal care is a huge window of opportunity because in the US, this is quite staggering, 96% of pregnant women receive some sort of prenatal care. And so this is an opportunity to develop trust and rapport with these clients and explore their options moving forward as they bring a child into the world. I have this video posted in Canvas as well, but this is a 15-minute video that is so excellent on helping you to understand the impacts of domestic violence and chronic stress or trauma in children. So as you watch this video, I would ask for you to think about what are the different ways that children respond or react to chronic trauma? They all respond differently. And what can we do to help build resilience in these children so that they don't end up in these sorts of situations as adults? I'll let you read these on your own. There's lots of statistics here, lots of examples of how children are exposed to intimate partner violence, the effects that this has on infants, the effects that this has on children. And I would just encourage you to think about this for a second, and what are the ways that the Walls children from the Glass Castle book, how are they showing these impacts of intimate partner violence? I would advocate that perhaps Jeanette does the last bullet point here, that she has the inability to be a child because she is constantly needing to protect her siblings and is worrying about her family. Mandated reporting, I'm guessing, is something that you're already very well aware of, but we are mandated reporters for child abuse, for elder abuse, and for suspicious injury. This is one that maybe isn't taught so clearly. So I just want to be clear that we are not allowed to report suspicious acts of abuse on adults. So not elders and not children, the adults that fall in the middle of that range. The only way that we are able to report is either if the victim is in agreement of reporting, or if we are, excuse me, treating an injury, a physical injury that is suspicious and looks like it could have been caused by abuse. So for me, working as a mental health care provider, this would not be something that I could report on because I am not treating physical injuries. I'm treating mental injuries, if you will. But if you are providing medical services for a suspicious injury, this is your way to report an adult abuse situation. Please click on this link here to make sure that you know the signs of elder abuse. But just want to make clear to you that financial abuse by family members is the most common form of mistreatment for elders. If you're not already aware, I really want you to be aware of this topic in the literature. We often talk about this in public health and in mental health, and this is ACEs. So this stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. The ACE study was an enormous study done by Southern California Kaiser Permanente back in the late 90s. And what they did is they took a ton of data where they calculated ACE scores. So they have on this next page, it talks about how you can calculate your own ACE score. I have that handout for you in Canvas as well. But you calculate your score based on the amount of trauma that you experienced in childhood, trauma, neglect, abuse, exposure to violence, etc. And then they followed these people throughout the rest of their life to look for rates of different types of health conditions. And they found significant correlations between the higher that your ACE score and the higher that your incidence of these things listed on this slide, these different health outcomes. It's pretty staggering what we are learning about the effects of chronic trauma and risky health behaviors, all kinds of chronic health conditions and mental health conditions later in life. And this is a good graphic. I invite you to pause and explore here to just think about the ways that adverse childhood experiences disrupt neurodevelopment early in life that causes children to then have impairments in the way that they respond to the world around them, the way that they learn, the way that they interact socially, the way that they learn to regulate their own emotions. And if they have impairments in those areas, they're more likely to adopt behaviors in life that are risky, such as experimenting with substance abuse or unhealthy sexual behaviors or choosing unhealthy relationship partners. And all of these things compound to create earlier and higher prevalence rates for disease and other social problems and early death. There's an article I've assigned for you this week that is fabulous, that describes the pathophysiology for this disrupted neurodevelopment with chronic stress and how, as public health nurses, we can begin to mitigate these issues. These slides at the end kind of just summarize what the article talks about. Please read it so you understand the mechanisms of toxic stress, and then make sure that you're able to answer these questions. What makes the biggest impact on children? Is it the type of adversity or the physiologic response? What mediates the stress response? What can we do, public health, to impact toxic stress? there can be resilience or post-traumatic growth. There is hope. Um, know that there's a lot of research coming out on post-traumatic growth, and you can Google that if you're interested. But there are things that we can do to help mitigate this. And here's more references if you're interested.